Hi everyone, Mary Lou here. Welcome back to my channel. This year I have been working on decluttering my whole house, and one of the things that I've really worked on decluttering is our food. And I haven't talked very much about that because it has really taken some time to kind of figure out some of the ins and outs of that little issue. Today I would like to talk with you about salt. Now, one of the things I've been trying to do in our food declutter is to get to the point where we are using things that are minimally processed. Now, we're not perfect at this. It is a process. It's not something that we have been able to do just suddenly, but we have been making small changes over the course of the full year. Now, so salt is one of those things that we considered. Now, I had the opportunity a couple of months ago to go to the store of the Food Nanny. I really have enjoyed the Food Nanny, the Food Nanny's posts on Instagram particularly, and the things that they do to improve the quality of our food. We're trying to go much more close to the earth and less processed. And so we started looking at salt. Now, what was normal for us was just kosher salt. That was the salt we used most all the time, just the regular old salt that we had. And then we have just plain old table salt. Both of those are iodized, and that's what we used. But we have kind of let those go, and we're going to a more basic salt. So let's talk a little bit about salt. Salt is sodium chloride, and it comes from the earth. There's salt all over the place. Generally, our salt comes from salt caves, lakes, or marshes. Some salt comes from the ocean, but it's harvested. And when you look at salt that is minimally processed, it has a gray color, and I have some in this bag. It has a gray color, so if you are seeing bright white salt, just know that that has been processed. It's been heated to very, very high temperatures, which kills off any trace elements that are in there, vitamins and minerals that might naturally occur in salt. It's killed all that off, gotten rid of all that. Plus, it's bleached. And we're trying to avoid anything bleached. And so, so you want to look for a gray salt, or in the case of Himalayan salt, it will be pink. Some salts are green. And I will put in the description below a source where you can get just such a wide variety of salts. It's just a good thing to look at, and a simple change to make. So if you're going down the line and making little changes toward eating more naturally, less processed, salt is one of the easiest things to switch. Salt prices vary, but generally it's not so expensive that you can't make that change. So one thing that's super interesting about salt, because it is a compound of sodium and chloride, that it becomes a very stable compound, and salt exists in nature. But sodium by itself doesn't exist in nature. It's too unstable. In fact, sodium is really interesting. If you take pure sodium and put it in water, it will explode, which is really exciting. If you want to see a really fun video about exploding sodium, go to The King of Random. They actually use sodium to blow up a toilet. It is a really interesting video. King of Random was one of my favorites. Anyway, sodium is very volatile, unstable alone, and never exists in nature alone. And chlorine at room temperature is a very toxic, deadly gas. And so you don't want either of them alone. You want them bound. And so once they bind, they create normal old table salt. And of course, we use salt for preserving food, for making our food taste better. But salt, both sodium and chloride, we really need in our bodies. They actually make it so that our nerves can conduct impulses. They make it so our muscles can contract and relax. They actually help our body regulate water and electrolytes and help us avoid dehydration. It's just, we can't live without salt. They're necessary to human life. So it's an important compound for us to have, and the more natural, of course, we are learning is better for us. Now, iodized salt is salt that has been heated to high temperatures, bleached, processed, and then iodine attached onto that molecule. And they started making iodized salt in the 1920s because people were showing big iodine deficiencies, and so they attached it to something as simple as salt. Natural salt does not have a high level of iodine. It has a trace of iodine, but not enough to prevent deficiencies. And so you might need to add some iodine into your diet, which we have done for a lot of reasons, not just because of the salt, but for several reasons. But that's something that you can look into and read about and make some decisions about. I want to share with you now some of the salts that we have been trying and looking at and that we've decided that we like. Okay, and I want to show you some of the differences between these salts and some of the more natural salts. And so the first one I want to show you, this is a natural salt. This actually comes from a salt marsh in France. And I will put a link in the description for a place you can go to buy a whole bunch of different kinds of salt and even learn where they have come from. So this is a grayish color, and natural salt isn't bright white. There's one that is white, and I'll explain to you why, but most salt, if you're seeing that bright white, that has been processed, because natural salt tends to be gray. If it's Himalayan, it might be pink. Some salts are green. So you want to look for a salt that's not that bright white. So this one harvested from a salt marsh, and I got that from the Food Nanny, and they were wonderful there. The people that run the Food Nanny are just the nicest people, and they're always looking for sources for food that is better quality, fewer fertilizers and chemicals and pharmaceuticals in the food. We want to get as much of that out of the food as we can, and the Food Nanny is just a good source, and they've got all kinds of good information too, and they're just the nicest people. And so that salt I got from them, and that is harvested from a marsh in France. I thought that was super interesting. And then another one from France is this fleur de sel. Fleur de sel is a salt that is harvested from the ocean. And so what they do is, because there's so much salt in the ocean water, they bring in the ocean water in like big, like trays kind of, and they let all of the water evaporate out, and then the sun and the wind processes it. And so this is a whiter salt, but it is natural, and it's white because it has had all that sun shining on it for so long, and that's what makes it a whiter salt. So that's probably the whitest in comparison to the processed salts, because it's had the sun on it. And then another one that I think is really pretty is the Himalayan pink salt. This has become much more popular. That salt is harvested from caves and rock. You can buy, chunks of Himalayan rock salt and have that. So that is just the look at the salt. So those are some kinds of salt. There are hundreds of salts out there, and you can get flavored salts. You can make flavored salts. Just take your salt, add herbs to it. You could add truffles to it. You can add other things to it to give it flavors and make it more fun. Or you can look online in the place that I will list in the comments below, and go look at the numbers of different kinds of salt that you can get. It's really very interesting. Salt has been important for centuries, and there have been at least 5 salt wars or skirmishes over rights to and control of salt marshes and caves and seas and everything. And so it's been pretty important, and it's spoken of in the Bible, and ancient Jewish tradition has what is called a salt covenant. I did a video back around Christmas time last year about the salt covenant and some of the fun things that we did as a family as we talked about that, and so I'll put that up here so you can, if you want to see that video. And also in ancient Jewish tradition, salt was required for all sacrifices at the temple. And so it was really important. It has high symbolism and has had for centuries. So with all the different kinds of salt, there are also salts that are specific for brining and pickling. Those are not iodized. They are processed though. But I figure if I'm going to make pickles, I will go ahead and use a pickling salt, even though it's processed, because I feel good about making my own pickles. But those are things that you kind of need to consider, and just know there are so many types of salt out there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my philosophy concerning salt, not just in that we're trying to eat closer to the earth and less processed, but there's something so unique about salt. And sometimes I think there are lessons for us in just the world around us, and we ought to be looking for them. And so this is one of the things I've been thinking about with regards to salt. That sodium and that chloride, they're so dangerous and so volatile alone, but together they create this amazing compound that is useful and helpful for us. So that made me really start to think about my philosophy and what things am I binding myself to, and what is the effect of doing that. And so it made me really start to think of salt as a lesson to look at and to evaluate ourselves. And so it made me think about, what am I attaching myself to, and what is the result? What happens because of that? One of the things in the Bible, it talks about salt that has lost its savor. And I've thought, are there things, ideas, ways of thinking, negative thoughts that have caused me to be less effective than I could be, or that make my life unhappy? Are there people or groups or ideologies that are violent or hurtful or self-absorbed, or any of those things that make life more difficult? Am I binding myself to good friends, to good ideas, instead of bad friends and time wasters and things that can make me actually inert to the point where I'm not reaching my potential, or I'm not adding to the good in the world? That whole idea of what we bind ourselves to has made me want to actually stop and take a look at people, activities, philosophies, practices that I attach myself to, and do those things lift and add and promote goodness and joy, or do they detract and tear down? And I think that's a really good question to ask, where sodium and chloride together go from volatile and dangerous to inert, peaceful, and good, that maybe there are things we could attach ourselves to that will add to our peace and our joy in life. So I think those things matter. I think our friends, who we attach ourselves to, and how we show that, I think it matters. I know from watching my kids, who they choose as friends is pretty much everything. So that's the end of my salt philosophy, but it's something that just made me think, and I think it's good when the earth around us gives us some thought, makes us pause. So I hope you enjoyed all this information about salt, and that you'll take an opportunity to look at different salts and maybe make that one little change in your diets to go to something less processed. But when it all comes down to something, remember, you love people more than things, always. And we'll see you next time.